cold gun with no rounds inside or dummy rounds. I take the gun out slowly, I cock the pistol, bang, it goes off, she hits the ground.
She's serious, she can't get up.
26 disturbing movie accidents, 7 levels. This iceberg contains the most disturbing accidents and mishaps that have ever happened on movie sets. Frank! We will start with the close calls and near misses, and gradually move into Hollywood's most devastating accidents. Let's start at the tip of the iceberg.
Whoa! Not bad!
Level 1. Scream, 1996. In the dramatic final confrontation of Scream, Sidney Prescott disguises herself in the ghost face costume to ambush her boyfriend Billy, who turns out to be the villain. She launches herself out of a closet and stabs him twice with an umbrella. The stunt was carefully orchestrated, with Skeet Ulrich wearing a protective padded vest under his costume to absorb the impact of the umbrella, which had a retractable tip to give the impression of stabbing. But Sidney's stunt double couldn't see through the mask. When director Wes Craven called action, the double jumped out and stabbed Skeet twice. The first stab perfectly hit the protective pad, but the second missed the padding, striking him directly in the chest in the worst possible place. As a child, Skeet had undergone open-heart surgery, leaving a stainless steel wire in his chest that would cause excruciating pain when touched. That umbrella happened to land in exactly that area, causing him to scream out in agonizing pain. Thankfully, Skeet walked out of the situation fine, but the incident could have ended up with a serious and potentially devastating injury. Craven ultimately decided to keep the take in the movie, believing Ulrich's genuine pain heightened the scene's raw intensity and helped mislead audiences into thinking Billy was truly dead. Only, this is a horror movie, and everybody who's seen the Scream movies knows the killer always comes back for one final scare.
Careful. This is the moment when the supposedly dead killer comes back to life for one last scare.
The authentic pain that Skeet showed in the scene made the movie into what it ultimately became, increasing the intensity and raw honesty. The Last Samurai, 2003. Tom Cruise has made a career out of death-defying stunts, but the most dangerous part of shooting The Last Samurai was nothing like hanging off a plane or being underwater for 6 minutes. It was a sword-fighting scene that almost left him headless. The sequence involved Cruise and his co-star Hiroyuki Sanada mounted on mechanical horses, simulating a high-speed clash where Sanada's character swings a sword at Cruise's neck. Cruise, of course, refused to use a stunt double. He had total trust in Sanada's martial arts expertise, but he didn't anticipate a technical problem.
Okay, take a breath. I want to do it at speed 48.
As the mechanical horses charged toward each other, Sanada's horse failed to stop at the programmed distance, propelling him much closer to Cruise than anyone intended. With the momentum carrying the sword towards Cruise's neck, Sanada recalled, "Tom's neck was right in front of me and I tried to stop swinging my sword, but it was hard to control with one hand." Ultimately, the blade stopped just 1 inch from Cruise's throat, and that was purely because of Sanada's years of martial arts training and split-second reflexes. The crew members, however, reportedly screamed, believing Cruise's head would fly off. Now You See Me, 2013. In the movie Now You See Me, illusionist Henley Reeves performs an incredible stunt in which she frees herself from shackles in a water tank as piranhas hover above. And yet, despite the intensity of the stunt, actress Isla Fisher insisted that she had to do it herself, a choice she would come to regret. She knew all about the risks, but for months, Fisher trained to hold her breath for extended periods, even practicing with restraints. But when it came time to shoot the scene, the chain connecting her ankles and wrists became entangled in the tank's grates, trapping her underwater in an extremely dangerous situation.
Dumb jokes while she was underwater, and she didn't want that, which is probably a good idea, especially because she did almost drown.
And I thought he'd try to get into the tank and upstage me.
Of course, Fisher began banging on the glass walls in genuine panic, but the crew initially mistook her distress for extremely convincing acting. But she had no access to the safety diver off camera or the emergency kill switch designed to drain the tank in 70 seconds, and her panic was rapidly depleting her oxygen. The team had not decided on a safety signal, which just made the situation even worse, leaving her unable to communicate the urgency. The director, Louis Leterrier, later revealed that Fisher held her breath for nearly 3 minutes during the ordeal and only freed herself seconds before she would have lost consciousness, making escape far less likely than a potentially devastating end. Level 2. Rust, 2021. On October 21, 2021, Alec Baldwin fired a Colt .45 revolver during a rehearsal for the Western film Rust at Bonanza Creek Ranch in New Mexico, fatally striking cinematographer Helena Hutchins in the chest and injuring director Joel Souza in the shoulder.
Now wait a second, if I'm gonna shoot right, you wanna go on the other side of the camera? I don't wanna shoot toward you.
The crew had been preparing a scene in which Baldwin's character, Harlan Rust, practiced a cross draw from a pew inside a church. According to the script's third act, the sequence involved Rust and his grandson evading enemies in a shootout that tore the church apart. But the rehearsal itself focused on blocking and technical setup, coordinating camera angles with Hutchins and Souza. Baldwin had been told that the gun was cold, which simply means it was safe to use.
Cold gun with no rounds inside or dummy rounds, cosmetic rounds, no flash. I take the gun out slowly, I cock the pistol, bang, it goes up, she hits the ground.
But what he didn't know is that Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, a newbie to the industry and the movie's armorer, had inadvertently introduced live ammunition onto the set and failed to follow basic firearms safety protocols. She did not check the gun before handing it to Baldwin, unaware that there was not a dummy cartridge inside, but an actual bullet. During the rehearsal, Baldwin removed the gun from its holster, stated, "So I guess I'm gonna take this out, pull it and go bang," and discharged the weapon without intentionally pulling the trigger, according to his account. Hutchins, standing 2 feet from the muzzle without protective gear, collapsed after telling a crew member, "That was no good, that was no good at all." The story instantly became a worldwide topic, but more and more information was released, painting a picture of a tragedy that could have been avoided multiple times. Just earlier that week, the crew had reported 3 accidental prop gun discharges, including one involving Baldwin's stunt double, but no additional safety meetings were held to address the problem. Ultimately, Gutierrez-Reed was convicted of involuntary manslaughter and sentenced to 18 months in prison, while Baldwin faced 2 criminal trials, which he pleaded not guilty to. The production ultimately resumed in Montana in 2023, with Hutchins' widower Matthew serving as executive producer and a total ban on functional weapons. But the movie's controversy never went away, even after it was completed. The Karate Kid Part 3, 1989. Toward the end of The Karate Kid Part 3, Mike Barnes, the antagonist of the movie, unleashes some brutal tactics to psychologically and physically destabilize our hero, Daniel LaRusso, in the finals of the All-Valley Karate Championship. But Sean Kanan, the actor playing Mike, was about to suffer a seriously worrying takedown of his own. Kanan insisted on performing his own high-impact stunts for these fight scenes, including repeated spin kicks, takedowns, and choreographed strikes designed to showcase Barnes' aggressive fighting style. But during shooting, he began experiencing severe leg pain, which he initially dismissed as routine muscle soreness from the demanding karate sequences. But the pain only got worse and worse as the movie got deeper into filming, eventually leading to Kanan collapsing on set at the Dunes Casino. Kanan was rushed to the hospital, where a doctor noticed his femoral artery became compromised by internal bleeding caused by the excessive stunts. And to make things worse, they warned him they might not be able to save his life as the blood pooling near the artery had created a ticking time bomb scenario. Even though he was undergoing emergency treatment, Kanan faced pressure from the studio to return to work within days to avoid recasting the role and spending more money. So against all medical advice, he discharged himself and resumed filming, performing nearly all his own stunts, including a high-speed car sequence, while still recovering. And the whole time, the studio refused to provide any accommodations or alterations for his condition. Despite that blatantly unfair situation, Kanan said that it forced him to confront mortality at age 23 and profoundly shaped his resilience going forward. Ghostland 2018. Taylor Hickson was just 19 when she was cast in Pascal Laugier's horror film Ghostland, a movie she thought would be her breakout. But one shooting day proved harder than she expected. The sequence required her to pound on a glass panel door with her fists while her face was positioned near the glass. Taylor felt uneasy about the idea, raising her safety concerns with director Pascal Laugier and one of the producers. But they promised her that the stunt was completely safe, encouraging her to hit the glass harder. Of course, she got so into the scene that the glass shattered during a take, propelling her head and upper body through the broken pane. Shards of glass lacerated the left side of her face. Taylor was immediately taken to the hospital to undergo emergency treatment for the deep wound that required 70 stitches. She later received laser and silicone therapies to minimize scarring, but the injury left her permanently scarred. The incident led to a lawsuit against the production company, the ironically named Incident Productions, claiming negligence, citing the failure to use safety glass, provide a stunt double, or implement adequate protective measures that could have prevented the incident. Hickson, who had just come off an appearance in Deadpool prior to the incident, said the scarring impacted her career prospects, leading to lost opportunities and a lot of emotional distress. Ultimately, she won the case, but the damage was done long before she got to court. Syriana, 2005. One particularly brutal scene in Syriana features George Clooney bound to a chair and violently beaten. But what audiences don't know is that the scene was just as torturous for Clooney and life-changing in the worst way.
Number 3 sound good to you? The purpose is to get monks or whatever.
When the chair was kicked over, Clooney struck his head on the concrete floor, unknowingly tearing his dura mater, the protective membrane surrounding the spinal cord and brain that contains cerebrospinal fluid. At first, Clooney downplayed the injury, convinced it was a simple movie-making accident and nothing to be concerned about. But days later, he developed debilitating symptoms that he could not ignore, including migraines so severe he described them as the most unbearable pain I've ever been through.
And all the spinal fluid goes out, and your brain sinks in your head, and it's attached to all these nerve endings. And it's really unbearably painful.
His cerebrospinal fluid started leaking through his nose, a hallmark symptom of the tear. But it took weeks for doctors to diagnose the issue. For weeks and months, Clooney suffered chronic pain, memory loss, and prolonged spinal instability. He eventually had no choice but to undergo emergency surgery and a blood patch procedure where his own blood was injected into the dura to seal the leak. Despite treatment, he suffered recurring spinal issues, including arthritis and disc problems. The injury left him reliant on painkillers for months, admitting he contemplated offing himself during the worst phases. Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, 2010 and 2011. In January 2009, David Holmes, Daniel Radcliffe's longtime Harry Potter stunt double since The Philosopher's Stone, was on set of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 1. The crew were rehearsing a scene in Godric's Hollow which would involve Harry Potter being violently thrown backward by an explosion caused by Voldemort's snake Nagini, who had possessed Bathilda Bagshot's corpse. To simulate the blast of that force, Holmes was rigged to a high-strength cable designed to yank him backwards onto a crash mat. But during the rehearsal, the cable system malfunctioned, suddenly propelling Holmes with way more force than anyone expected. David collided with the wall before landing on the mat, immediately fracturing his neck on impact.
As soon as I left the floor, as soon as I had the load hit me in the wire, I was like, nope, that's too big.
He initially believed he'd only suffered minor injuries, concerned that complaining would just worry other people. But when he was asked to squeeze the stunt coordinator's hand, he realized he couldn't move his fingers no matter how hard he tried. As it turns out, the impact caused a C6-C7 spinal cord injury, paralyzing him from the chest down, and subsequent surgeries revealed a spinal cyst that further limited mobility in his arms, and all because of a freak accident. The stunt's complexity had left little room for error, requiring precise cable tension to mimic that explosive force. He had done these wirework stunts for years, but this was a much faster, violent motion, and after 8 movies, everyone was uncomfortably casual about safety. The injury ended Holmes' stunt career at age 22, though he transitioned to activism for stunt performer safety and founded Ripple Productions. Daniel Radcliffe remained a close friend, visiting him during rehabilitation and executive producing the 2023 HBO documentary David Holmes, The Boy Who Lived. While we're here, help us avoid an accident of our own and hit that subscribe button. Level 3. Resident Evil, The Final Chapter, 2016. During the filming of Resident Evil The Last Chapter in 2015, stunt performer Olivia Jackson was doubling for lead actress Milla Jovovich. They were due to shoot a fight scene, but the production decided to pivot at the last minute to a complex motorcycle sequence in rainy conditions. Jackson would have to ride the motorcycle toward a camera crane which was mounted on top of a car traveling the opposite way, timed just so that the crane would lift over her head as she passed. But during the final take, the camera operator delayed lifting the crane by 1 second, causing a catastrophic collision at 71 miles per hour. Hitting the crane at that force tore through her left arm, shattered her face, exposing her teeth through a skinless cheek, fractured her spine, ruptured neck arteries, and caused brain swelling. For 17 days, Jackson was in a medically induced coma and underwent multiple surgeries, including the total amputation of her arm. Long-term consequences included permanent paralysis on her left side, a dislocated shoulder, chronic pain, and the inability to continue her career as a stunt performer.
17 days later, I wake up to see my husband's face and my mother's face. Sorry.
Today, she requires ongoing rehabilitation and a $750,000 to $1 million surgery to address the extensive spinal damage. In 2019, Jackson sued producers Paul W.S. Anderson and Jeremy Bolt, alleging negligence and insufficient safety planning which contributed to the incident. The South African High Court ultimately found the stunt crew and director liable, saying that these last-minute changes reduced safety margins for a more exciting shot. But it turns out the production also did not have the right insurance, leaving Jackson reliant on South Africa's Road Accident Fund to help pay for her extensive treatment. She's since gone on record to criticize the producers for abandoning her financially while profiting from the film's $312 million global box office success. Transformers: Dark of the Moon, 2011. During the filming of Transformers: Dark of the Moon on September 1, 2010, Gabriela Cedillo, a 24-year-old aspiring actress working as an extra, was one of around 80 extras on set in Hammond, Indiana. The scene involved approximately 80 extras driving their personal vehicles in the background while stunt cars performed maneuvers in front. Gabriela was driving her 2006 Toyota at 50 miles per hour when a steel tow cable, which was being used to pull another vehicle in the stunt, snapped under tension. One of the brackets had been poorly welded, leaving it vulnerable. The cable whipped through her windshield, striking her in the head and causing catastrophic injuries. Gabriela was left with irreversible brain damage, requiring emergency surgery that removed a third of her skull just to relieve swelling. She lost vision in her left eye, suffered permanent paralysis on her left side, and developed memory loss, seizures, and cognitive issues that made her behave like a small child. Even now, 15 years later, she experiences hallucinations and struggles with basic judgment, requiring round-the-clock care for daily activities like walking and feeding herself. She's effectively lost a significant portion of her brain's right hemisphere. But the investigation revealed that the stunt had failed the previous day too, thanks to the same faulty weld, which crews inadequately repaired overnight. Her attorneys argued Paramount Pictures and DreamWorks prioritized cost-cutting over safety, initially reneging on promises to cover her medical bills before a long legal battle. Fortunately, the settlement funds her lifelong rehabilitation and compensates for lost future earnings, marriage prospects, and independence. Her brother described the emotional toll, stating, "We feel like we lost her that day, and all because she followed her ambitions." Cyborg, 1989. During the filming of Cyborg, Jean-Claude Van Damme accidentally injured co-star Jackson "Rock" Pinkney during a fight scene. The scene required Pinkney to charge through a pool of water, swinging a rubber knife at Van Damme, and have the weapon kicked away before a simulated throat slashing. During rehearsals, director Albert Pyun had repeatedly warned Van Damme about excessive contact after witnessing him come dangerously close to Pinkney's face. But instead, Van Damme continued as he always had. His prop knife struck Pinkney's left eye and caused permanent, irreversible blindness. After the incident, Pinkney, who was an active-duty U.S. Army soldier at the time, was medically discharged due to the injury and struggled to find steady work afterward. As the years passed with no income, Pinkney finally sued Van Damme for willful negligence, initially seeking $10,000 in damages. Van Damme's legal team argued the injury was accidental, but Van Damme had a well-known reputation for prioritizing on-screen realism over safety, with multiple complaints about him causing unnecessary injuries to his co-stars and stuntmen. Stunt coordinator Tom Elliott testified about Van Damme's disregard for safety protocols, and actor-stuntman Blaise Lung also confirmed the allegations. Ultimately, Van Damme was ordered to pay $487,000 in damages due to his manifest indifference to the consequences of his actions. The Expendables 2, 2012. On October 27, 2011, 26-year-old Chinese stuntman Kun Lu arrived at the Ungnyanovo Dam in Bulgaria to shoot a scene for The Expendables 2. The scene was part of the second unit production, meaning that it was stunt material not involving the key actors and shot by an entirely different crew. In fact, the main cast and director were filming 2.5 hours away, leaving them totally clueless as to what was going on at the dam. Lu was in an inflatable rubber boat with another stuntman, Nuo Sun, prepared for a stunt with explosions. But one of the explosions misfired, propelling debris that fatally wounded Lu and left Sun with critical injuries. Lu died immediately, while Sun was forced to undergo emergency surgery and eventually stabilized. The following year, Lu's parents filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the production companies and the second unit director for their lackluster security. After a 4-year legal battle, the family received only $25,000 in a settlement. But Jet Li, the actor Lu was doubling for in the movie, privately donated $750,000, saying he felt personally committed to support them. Despite the tragedy, The Expendables 2 released as scheduled on October 2012, dedicating its credits to Lu's memory. No criminal charges were filed. Gone Fishin', 1997. On December 19, 1995, near Marco Island, Florida, Disney was shooting a new movie called Gone Fishin'. The scene being shot involved a high-speed boat stunt. A 21-foot Ranger vessel powered by twin 225-horsepower engines was supposed to hit a greased metal ramp at 40 miles per hour, launch over mangrove trees, and land between two stationary boats. In the boat were two stunt doubles for Joe Pesci and Danny Glover, both having nailed the slower rehearsal the previous day. But now it was time for the real thing. As the boat accelerated toward the ramp during filming, it veered off-center, missing the V-shaped guide groove designed to keep it perfectly aligned. The vessel spun 90 degrees counterclockwise, flipped upside down mid-air, and crashed into two nearby boats where crew members and extras stood. Janet Wilder, a 29-year-old stuntwoman, was positioned in one of the boats while holding hands with her husband, veteran stuntman Scott Wilder. But before she even knew what was happening, she was struck in the head by the airborne craft. The crew quickly rushed her to the hospital, but Janet was dead long before she got there. Scott sustained minor injuries alongside his father, legendary stunt coordinator Glenn Wilder, and 2 other crew members. The disaster was caused by a number of unfortunate factors. The boat's driver totally failed to properly center the vessel on the ramp. The directors had demanded faster speeds after the rehearsal's underwhelming impact, reducing control of the vehicle. Extras and crew members were standing closer than safety protocols typically allowed, with witnesses later admitting they felt unsafe about their positioning, and choppy waters and high tides made the stunt far more difficult. The incident immediately became one of Hollywood's deadliest on-scene accidents of the 1990s. The production halted temporarily, and the Occupational Safety and Health Administration opened an investigation, noting that much of this was caused because the stunt coordinator was sorely lacking in boat-specific experience. The Sword and the Sorcerer, 1982. A pivotal battle sequence in The Sword and the Sorcerer sees the movie's villain jumping from an 80-foot cliff, a stunt that was to be performed for real by veteran stuntman Jack Tyree. Tyree would leap from a rocky ledge and land on a large airbag positioned below, a maneuver he had successfully pulled off in a few other projects, including stunt-heavy TV shows like The Rockford Files. But despite some concern from crew members about the high-risk nature of the fall, Jack decided he was going to do it. After all, he had years of experience. He was extremely confident. But witnesses described Tyree's descent as uncharacteristically uncontrolled. Instead of the standard flat-back dive, he launched from the cliff at a steep angle, head down, with limbs flailing, and landed partially on the airbag, but not before hitting multiple nearby boulders with his upper body. The impact caused fatal injuries, and he died not long afterward. In fact, Jack had missed the airbag center by around 2 feet, though the exact cause for his strangely chaotic dive remains unclear to this very day. Director Albert Pyun has said that Tyree had claimed to be familiar with the location, having performed similar jumps there before. Some crew members suspect that Tyree may have hesitated or become disoriented mid-jump, potentially due to last-minute doubts or a loss of footing. But the cliff was known for its uneven terrain, and the airbag's placement near jagged rocks raised questions about the setup's safety margins. Even a slight error would have caused instant death. The whole thing could have been avoided had the crew prepared the site better. Clearing debris around the landing zone or using a larger reinforced airbag could have accounted for trajectory errors. But even though all of this tragedy unfolded on the set, Tyree's family permitted the use of the footage in the final cut. Tyree's final stunt is indeed in the movie, and the film was dedicated to him. Level 4. Midnight Rider, The Greg Allman Story, 2014. On February 20th, 2014, their first day of production, the crew of Midnight Rider, The Greg Allman Story was filming a dream sequence on an active railroad trestle over Georgia's Altamaha River. The scene involved Oscar-winning actor William Hurt, portraying musician Greg Allman, lying on a metal-framed hospital bed placed directly on the tracks as part of a hallucination involving his dead brother, played by Wyatt Russell. The producers had repeatedly said the location was totally safe to film in, yet the crew had no actual permission from railroad operator CSX to film there. And just as the cameras started rolling, a CSX freight train traveling at 58 miles per hour approached the trestle with no warning, giving the crew less than a minute to evacuate. Chaos immediately followed as cast and crew scrambled to clear the tracks. Video footage shows crew members frantically attempting to remove equipment and the bed while fleeing toward the oncoming train. They weren't fast enough. The collision shattered the bed, propelling shrapnel toward the 27-year-old camera assistant Sarah Jones, who was struck and instantly killed. 8 others were seriously injured in the accident, and only when the story broke did it become clear that the production never invested in safety spotters, medical personnel, or even a basic evacuation plan. It was always doomed. The director had been repeatedly warned by CSX about trespassing, so when the case came to trial, he had no choice but to plead guilty to involuntary manslaughter and criminal trespass in 2015, receiving a 2-year prison sentence and probation. Yet, they still found opportunity in this unimaginable tragedy. Footage from the accident was edited into a scene depicting Hurt's character avoiding death. When the controversy inevitably kicked up, Miller insisted that the scene was meant to explain his artistic intent and not take advantage or exploit the tragic death. But Hollywood was galvanized by the whole situation, sparking the Safety for Sarah movement to improve on-set protections. The controversy became way too much for the film to overcome, leading to its shutdown. To this day, it remains unreleased. Comes a Horseman, 1978. In 1978 Western film Comes a Horseman, there's a scene where Jason Robard's character J.W. Ewing is dragged to his death by a horse. For the scene, Robards was doubled by a stuntman named Jim Shepard, who was expected to really be dragged behind a galloping horse through a fence gate. The setup involved the horse running a predetermined straight path, and while rehearsals had gone well, the real shoot was not going to go the same way. During the take, the animal veered off course unexpectedly, causing Shepard's head to hit a wooden fence post at high speed, resulting in severe blunt force trauma. The scene was instantly cut, and even though he got instant medical attention, Shepard succumbed to his injuries shortly after being hospitalized. But his death put the film in a very difficult position. The death occurred near the end of filming, forcing the filmmakers to decide if the footage should make it into the film or be cut entirely. Ultimately, they decided to keep the scene in the final cut, but to edit to cut away just before the moment of impact, implying the character's off-screen demise rather than showing it explicitly. Given the contributions made to the movie, director Alan J. Pakula and the studio opted to dedicate it to Shepard in the closing credits as a tribute. No legal action was reported against the production, but it's still mentioned as one of the most fatal on-screen accidents in Hollywood history. XXX, 2002.
I live for this!
On April 4, 2002, during production of XXX in Prague, the Czech Republic, stuntman and retired Navy SEAL Harry O'Connor died while performing a high-speed paragliding stunt for a scene involving Vin Diesel's character Xander Cage. The sequence required O'Connor, an experienced skydiver, to be towed by a boat across the Vltava River while suspended from a paraglider, all to create an airborne chase. The first attempt was a resounding success. But during the second attempt at the stunt, O'Connor collided with a pillar of the historic Pulaski Bridge at an estimated 50 miles per hour. The impact led to immediate and fatal neck and head injuries. Concerned that the incident could lead to some seriously bad press, the production team immediately imposed a media embargo following the incident, with Prague police confirming only basic details to the press to try and control the narrative. But the reality was very sinister and unsettling. Nobody ever found out whether equipment failure, pilot error, or spatial disorientation caused the collision. But his widow said that O'Connor had expressed concerns about pressure to perform these increasingly risky stunts. Paramount Pictures ultimately faced no formal legal action, as Czech labor authorities classified the death as an occupational hazard. But the studio donated $250,000 to O'Connor's family and established a safety review process for future productions to avoid repeating this fatal error.
Oh.
His first attempt at the stunt, which was successful, remains in the movie. But Harry O'Connor, after 2,000 skydives and 147 film stunts, was forever going to be defined as the first fatality on a major Hollywood production since the 1993 Twilight Zone the movie lawsuit. Golden Eagle, 1970. On October 8, 1970, legendary Thai action star Mit Chaiban Cha was shooting the helicopter stunt for the closing sequence of his latest movie, Golden Eagle, but this one would be like no other. The scene required his character, Red Eagle, to climb a rope ladder dangling from a helicopter and fly off victoriously into the sunset. Despite the scene's celebratory vibe, the stunt totally lacked any kind of safety protocols. And that's because Mit was so insistent about performing the sequence himself without a stunt double. As the helicopter ascended over the Dongten beach in Pattaya, Mit leaped to grab the ladder, but only reached the lowest rung. Unaware of his precarious grip, the pilot continued gaining altitude. Onlookers had to watch Mit dangling for several seconds before losing his hold and plummeting roughly 30 meters to the ground, dying instantly upon impact. The entire incident was captured on camera, and it was left in the movie. Audiences who saw the original release witnessed the fatal death of the icon they came to see, a horrific thought. Later DVD editions replaced the fatal fall with a freeze-frame tribute text. The production failed on multiple fronts, from the absence of a second shot with a stunt double doing the stunt at higher altitude, to Mit's exhaustion from a grueling production schedule. His death came as an unimaginable shock to the industry, his funeral drawing tens of thousands of mourners with crowds demanding to view his body. Footage of the cremation ceremony was later included as a DVD extra, another eerie memorial for audiences. Level 5. Jumper, 2008. It was January 26, 2007, and crew members on the movie Jumper were dismantling an exterior set in Toronto. The movie had wrapped 2 weeks before, and the crew had finally moved to a 30-foot wooden structure designed to resemble a historic building. They had been working in sub-zero temperatures to tear down the set, and set dresser David Ritchie was one of the many helping out. Ritchie and 2 others were shoveling the material near the base of the structure when a frozen mass of debris dislodged, sending a mix of earth, sand, and ice falling down right on top of him and crushing him to death. A second worker sustained serious head and shoulder injuries but survived. No rescue efforts were made for Ritchie given his instant death. Not long before the incident, the timber set, which was layered with soil and vegetation, had been partially excavated by heavy machinery, but there were no safety protocols in place, with crew members not wearing hard hats, despite Ontario law requiring them. Toronto police initially described the event as a fluke accident, but there were many safety violations in action, resulting in a $250,000 fine. The Iger Sanction, 1975. In August 1974, director and star Clint Eastwood arrived in Switzerland to shoot his latest movie, The Iger Sanction. Production had reached a critical sequence featuring a rock slide on the treacherous north face of the Iger Mountain. The scene required climbers to dodge falling debris during a perilous ascent, and, like most action stars, Clint decided he would do all of his own stunts to ensure realism and authenticity. But after wrapping the initial shots, the climbing advisor, Mike Hoover, realized additional point-of-view footage of tumbling rocks was needed to heighten the sequence's intensity. Hoover and 26-year-old British climber David Knowles volunteered to rappel back down the ledge to capture the angle. But as they packed their gear, a massive boulder dislodged from above, falling and hitting both men. Knowles was killed instantly, with Hoover suffering a fractured pelvis and severe bruising. The crew, including Eastwood, was said to be grief-stricken, with production nearly shut down as a result. However, the climbing team urged Eastwood to continue, arguing that abandoning the film would render Knowles' death meaningless. Eastwood agreed, later stating the film would serve as a memorial to Knowles and his courageous spirit. The accident actually just further proved the notorious dangers of the Iger's Wall, where over 40 climbers had already perished by 1974. But Eastwood's constant insistence on authenticity, dismissing stunt doubles and safety shortcuts just drew more and more criticism from crew members, including cameraman Frank Stanley, who was later injured in a separate fall. Yet, despite the deaths and the consistent injuries on the set, Eastwood performed a harrowing 4,000-foot rope cut for the film's climax, captured via telephoto lens to prove it was really him. Braddock, Missing in Action 3, 1988. On May 30th, 1987, a Philippine Air Force Sikorsky S-26 helicopter hired for the movie Braddock Missing in Action 3 crashed into Manila Bay near the village of Naik during filming, killing 4 Filipino soldiers and injuring 5 others. The aircraft had been leased by the production company for $1,000 per hour to capture aerial footage of Puerto Azul, a resort doubling as a Vietnamese location. The helicopter departed from Villamor Air Base but reportedly experienced engine trouble shortly after takeoff, though the exact cause still remains undetermined. The crash occurred during a low-altitude maneuver, though it's still unknown exactly what caused the incident. However, despite the fatalities, filming continued almost immediately. One of the producers said that the incident was very upsetting, but that decisions rested with Philippine authorities. In fact, the producers felt they had many more pressing and urgent problems to contend with, including 6 director changes and a $9 million budget. The production company ultimately kept its distance from accountability or responsibility, blaming the problem on the Philippine Air Force, which never bothered to publicly address maintenance standards or pilot training following the crash. Braddock's release in 1988 dedicated no on-screen memorial to the victims. The production company never took responsibility or donated money to the families of the deceased. And the studio's financial struggles at the time, coupled with Chuck Norris's dissatisfaction over the movie's marketing, overshadowed the incident in the press. Nobody even knew about the people who died. Level 6. Shark, 1969. During the filming of the 1969 film Caine, Mexican stuntman Jose Marco was killed while shooting underwater scenes as Burt Reynolds' double, and yet nobody has any idea what exactly happened. The sequence involved a shark attack in waters off Manzanillo, Mexico, where production had set up a fenced enclosure. But this is where the stories start to get complicated. Some sources claim a great white shark breached the protective nets and attacked Marco mid-filming, while others allege an improperly sedated bull shark awoke violently and turned on him. Crew members attempted to intervene with spears to kill the shark, but Marco sustained fatal abdominal injuries and died shortly after. But the death of Jose didn't stop the movie. The producers decided to capitalize on the tragedy, using the footage of the attack in the movie's opening scene, and rebranding the movie Shark, one of the most insensitive and cruel moves in Hollywood history. Director Samuel Fuller was horrified by the change and the exploitation of the tragedy and disowned the project entirely. He set out to remove his name from the credits, but the studio refused. Reports from Life magazine in 1968 sensationalized the incident, describing the shark disemboweling Marco on camera, but we now know that never happened. In fact, one journalist went digging into Mexican hospital records, death certificates, and local news coverage and found nothing to corroborate the event. Life later retracted its story, admitting the incident might have been a hoax staged for publicity. It's currently impossible to identify fact from fiction. The film's surviving footage shows a gray shark, not a great white or bull shark, which just undermines claims of an authentic attack even more. But while the truth remains murky, the producer's decision to market the film around Marco's death cemented Shark as a notorious and particularly cruel example of exploitation in cinema history. Fitzcarraldo, 1982. No movie has had a more notorious behind-the-scenes story than Werner Herzog's Fitzcarraldo. Many of the relentless strings of disasters occurred during the filming of its central logistical nightmare, hauling a 320-ton steamship over a steep hill in the Peruvian Amazon. The production was in the middle of a remote jungle, hundreds of miles from medical facilities. The crew lived in a makeshift camp with limited supplies, forced to rely on indigenous labor and manual engineering to get through the complicated scenes. But that was the easy part. Multiple crew members had been left critically injured following 2 plane crashes, while another worker, bitten by a venomous snake, resorted to amputating his own foot with a chainsaw to prevent the venom from spreading. All of this happened before filming, and it got worse. During the shooting of the steamship sequence, tensions with local tribes escalated for the worse.
And I spread rumors we would slaughter them and take the out of their bodies and cook the and that we would rape their women.
After discovering that Herzog constructed a village on their land without consultation, the Aguaruna people burned the original film set. Later, the Amahuaca tribe attacked the camp, shooting an extra through the neck with an arrow and injuring another who required 8 hours of improvised surgery on a kitchen table. And again, there was a lot more disaster to come, even for the indigenous cast and crew. A logger drowned after borrowing a canoe without permission, while others succumbed to diseases amplified by the harsh environment. And then there was Klaus Kinski, one of the most notorious and volatile actors in the history of cinema.
Schrei ich oder schrei ich nicht? Und du sagst es mir nicht, aber schrei aber nicht. Leg mich doch am Arsch.
Kinski and Herzog's relationship is infamous within the film industry, thanks to Kinski's unpredictable and aggressive handling of his day-to-day life. One day he turned up to the set with a gun, which he fired on the set, and blew off an extra's finger. The act provoked so much rage on the set that tribal leaders pulled Herzog aside and offered to Kinski. Herzog, of course, declined, but only because they had shot so much of the movie it would be too much effort to recast.
Ist der einzige Mensch, von dem ich im Grunde genommen etwas gelernt habe.
Although later Herzog would go on record to say he considered it. The most disturbing aspect of all is how detached Herzog was from all of it. His journals reveal that all he really cared about was the movie. The humans died, but the movie was made, and that's what mattered. Noah's Ark. There's one sequence that is essential in the 1928 biblical epic Noah's Ark, and it's the most obvious. The movie climaxes with the legendary flood, something that director Michael Curtiz wanted to make feel urgent, epic, and truly scary. The production built a massive Babylonian temple set with around 600,000 to 1 million gallons of water ready to simulate the biblical deluge. The production had hired over 7,000 extras to make the scene feel more alive, but the team decided not to tell them about what was going to happen because he wanted to capture realistic panic on camera. The cinematographer objected to the idea, knowing that the untrained extras would be seriously hurt or worse in the deluge. But Curtiz didn't care, reportedly saying they're going to have to take their chances. In response, the cinematographer resigned in protest, vowing never to take part in something so reckless. He was right. When the water was released, the force of the deluge slammed extras into concrete floors and debris, causing mass chaos. 3 extras drowned during filming, while another sustained injuries so severe his leg required amputation. Dozens suffered broken bones, and the lead actress Dolores Costello nearly drowned, later developing pneumonia as a result of the carnage. A young John Wayne, then an unknown extra, was also one of the thousands to narrowly survive the ordeal. 35 ambulances were dispatched to handle the injured, with reports of nearly a dozen serious limb fractures and other trauma. But Curtiz got the shots he wanted, at a cost. Officially, Warner Brothers records are said to have allegedly omitted some of the fatalities to try and cover themselves from legal action. But the incident directly led to the implementation of stunt safety regulations in 1928, a decision far too late for those permanently injured or survivors like Costello later condemned the production as a horrifying blend of mud, blood, and flood. Level 7. Twilight Zone, the movie. 1983. On July 23, 1982, a crew was shooting what would become the single worst and most infamous movie ever made, a feature-length version of a legendary show, Twilight Zone, the movie. The movie was made up of 3 short stories, each directed by a legendary director. By July, John Landis was shooting his section, a Vietnamese war-themed story. The sequence was to involve a character played by Vic Morrow rescuing 2 children from an attack with explosions simulating intense mortar fire near a low-flying helicopter. 2 Vietnamese child actors, Micah Jing Lê and Renée Sinh Yi Chen, both aged 7 and 6, had been cast for the roles and would be performing their own stunts alongside Morrow. But when Landis called action, everything went horribly wrong. The pyrotechnic detonations disrupted the aircraft's tail rotor, causing it to spiral into the actors. Morrow and Lee were trapped by the rotor blades, while Chen was crushed by the landing skid. And all of it was witnessed by Micah's own mother, who was on set to see her son's death as it unfolded.
After the first blast, I became so horrified. All the memory of the war come to my mind.
The production had been a disaster from the get-go. The children were hired illegally, lacking the work permits that they were legally required. The late-night shoot breached child labor laws, and Landis consistently ignored warnings from crew members about the low-altitude helicopter's proximity to live explosions. The story became a major headline scandal. Steven Spielberg, a co-producer on the movie and the director of a segment, publicly said that the deaths were sickening, severing all ties with Landis and making clear that no movie is worth dying for. Others testified that Landis knowingly overruled safety concerns, shouting, "Get lower," moments before the crash. Yet, despite all this, Landis, pilot Dorsey Wingo, and 3 crew members were acquitted of involuntary manslaughter in 1987.
Landis's attorney is quoted as saying he believes the director will be charged with involuntary manslaughter.
It's since been widely considered one of the most sickening mistakes ever made in a court of law. The Directors Guild of America introduced stricter safety guidelines, while the Screen Actors Guild amended contracts to allow actors to refuse unsafe conditions. Yet, despite these changes, similar incidents have happened since, like the deaths on The Crow and Rust. The Conqueror, 1956. In 1953, the U.S. government conducted 11 above-ground atomic tests at the Nevada National Security Site, leaving the region contaminated with dangerous radioactivity. Just 2 years later, John Wayne and his crew arrived in nearby Utah to shoot a movie, never knowing that they were exposed to that same radiation. The Atomic Energy Commission had tried to convince director Dick Powell and producer Howard Hughes not to do location shoots for the Genghis Khan battle sequences. But the production went ahead regardless. For weeks, the crew shot in heavily contaminated zones, even importing 60 tons of Utah sand to Hollywood sound stages for reshoots. But the consequences wouldn't be seen for years to come. Of the 220 cast and crew members who worked within the toxic circumstances, 91 of them developed cancers over the following decades, with 46 fatalities. John Wayne, a lifelong smoker, died of stomach cancer in 1979, but his co-stars suffered other cancers. Susan Hayward died of brain cancer, Agnes Moorehead uterine cancer, and Pedro Armendariz was diagnosed with kidney cancer. None of them had any history of smoking. Armendariz died by in 1963 upon learning his cancer was terminal, while director Powell succumbed to lymphoma in 1963. Even visitors to the set were met with brutal cancers. Wayne's son Michael developed skin cancer after brief set visits, and local Paiute extras almost definitely suffered similar fates. The consistent pattern led people to note that the cancer rate of the movie, which was 41%, far exceeded national averages. The cluster patterns of the diagnosis suggested that they had inhaled alpha-emitting particles during filming. Initially, the government downplayed the idea that the radiation could have been carried downwind, but the consistent pattern forced them to reconsider it, especially when St. George residents faced elevated leukemia and thyroid cancer rates mirroring the film's casualties.